In this video, I'm going to show you 5 must-know Photoshop tips and tricks for photographers. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Photoshop tutorial. My name is Jesus Ramirez. You can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you 5 must-know Photoshop tips and tricks for photographers. The tips are going to deal with masking, portrait retouching, different color modes, and workflow examples to speed up your retouching. Okay, let's get started. In the first tip, I'm going to show you how to work with Luminosity mask. We're going to work with this image here, and we want to adjust the highlights of the image. So the easiest way to select the highlights of the image is by pressing Ctrl-Alt-2, that's Command Option and the number 2 on the Mac, and that makes a selection around the bright pixels of the image. If I create an adjustment layer, like the curves adjustment layer, that selection gets applied to the layer mask. If I hold Alt, Option on the Mac and click on the layer mask, you can see we made a selection out of the bright pixels. So obviously it looks like a black and white image. White reveals and black conceals. So right now we're mainly targeting the bright pixels of the image. So if I make an adjustment, you'll notice that we target mainly the bright pixels. We can do the opposite by selecting the layer mask, clicking on Invert, and now we're targeting the dark pixels. If I hold Alt, Option on the Mac and click on the layer mask, you'll see that we have mainly the dark pixels selected. So I can go into the curve, make that adjustment, and it only affects the dark tones of the image. And let me just show you quickly why that keyboard shortcut works. If I go into the channels panel, you'll see that we have Ctrl-2, Ctrl-3, Ctrl-4, Ctrl-5. If I press Ctrl-3, that's Command 3 on the Mac, I select that channel. Ctrl-4 and Ctrl-5. I'm simply selecting them. But if I want to load them as selections, Ctrl-Alt-5 makes a selection out of the brighter pixels of that channel. Ctrl-2 is the RGB mode, and it also contains the luminance. So Ctrl-Alt-2 will select the luminance values. Another way of doing that, if you cannot remember the keyboard shortcut, is by simply holding Control, that's Command on the Mac, and clicking on the RGB thumbnail, and that makes the exact same selection as pressing Ctrl-Alt-2. And once again, that selects the brighter pixels of the image, and that's how you can target those pixels with adjustment layers. In this tip, I'm going to show you a fast and efficient way of removing wrinkles, blemishes, and other distractions from the face. So if we wanted to remove the wrinkles on her chin, you probably would use something like the Spot Healing Brush tool with Content Aware, and that would be a good place to start. You would create a new layer, make sure that Sample All Layers is selected so that we can work non-destructively, and then you would come in here and try to paint away those wrinkles. And Photoshop does a pretty decent job at it, but if you zoom in close, you'll see that it's not looking very good. It's destroying the detail found in the image, and that is because we had a really strong highlight on the chin. So we want to try to keep that detail so that the adjustment looks more realistic. So I'm going to delete that layer, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to show you a method that you should use. With the Spot Healing Brush tool selected, think of the blemish, wrinkle, or distraction you're trying to remove. Is it darker than the skin tone, or is it brighter than the skin tone? In this case, the wrinkle is darker than the skin tone. That means that we want to lighten that wrinkle. So, under Mode, select Lighten, and then do the same thing. Just start painting, and you'll see that the wrinkle gets removed, but we don't lose that highlight, and the chin remains more realistic. So that's before and after. And like with any other retouching job, extremes are not that good. Bring down the opacity down to about 70%. You just want to minimize the distracting element, not necessarily remove it completely from the face. And you can keep doing the same with all the other wrinkles on the face. At some point, you're going to run into a different kind of problem where you click and drag to remove the distraction, but it doesn't go away. In this case, the wrinkle, the distraction, is brighter than the skin tone. That means that we will never be able to remove it because of the mode that we're on. But if we change it to darken, because we want to darken that blemish, or that wrinkle rather, then we can remove it. So that's before and after. Obviously, if we bump up the opacity to 100%, it completely removes it. But again, I don't think that's the way to go. Usually in retouching, I like to keep things subtle and a little more realistic. So I think that's the way to go. At about 60 to 70% in this case, so we'll split the difference and go to 65, before and after. This technique also becomes really useful in areas that contain detail and have blemishes that you would like to remove. In this case, I have blemishes on his forehead that I would like to remove, but there's fine detail that I would like to keep, like these strands of hair. So if I create a new layer to work non-destructively, make sure that sample all layers is checked, and just to show you, I'm going to select the normal mode, which is what most people use. So if I were to start removing blemishes, like so, notice that I get a lot of distortion in the image. I don't keep the fine detail, and I introduce detail I don't want, and these strands of hair don't look realistic. So I'm going to undo those brush strokes by pressing Ctrl-Alt-Z, and I'm going to change my mode to lighten, because the blemishes that I want to remove in this image are darker than the skin tones. So I can start removing these blemishes, and right away you see that I don't lose any of the detail. All the detail is kept. I can even remove that wrinkle, and all the strands of hair are fine, and I can continue painting away other wrinkles in the image. And of course, I'm working non-destructively, so that's before and after. So I recommend you looking at the lighten and darker modes when working with the spot healing brush tool and Content Aware to remove blemishes, wrinkles, and other distractions from faces. In this tip, I'm going to show you how to work with the same document in two windows. The reason that you would want to work with the same document in two windows is so that you can both work with fine details and the overall image at the same time. Let me show you what I mean by that. We're going to work with this image of this castle, and I'm going to go into Window, Arrange, and at the very bottom select New Window 4 and the name of the file. So now I have the same file open in two windows. Then I can go into Window, Arrange, 2 up vertical or 2 up horizontal. In this case, we'll do 2 up vertical, and it puts the same document side by side on two different windows. This works better when you're working with two monitors. I do have two monitors here, but you can only see one through the recording, so we're gonna have to do it all in one monitor. But anyway, on the left hand side, I'm gonna zoom in, and then I'm just gonna look at the details of the image. So maybe we wanna remove some of these windows. On the right hand side, I want to zoom out so we can see the overall image. So you can double tap on the hand tool, maybe even zoom out further than that. So maybe something like that so we can see the overall image. Then I'm going to create a new layer to work non-destructively, and I'm going to click on the clone stamp tool, and we're just going to clone this area out. Make sure that sample all layers is selected, and I'm just going to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, click on the sample source, and just start painting. Notice that as I'm painting, on the right hand side, right in this area here, the window starts disappearing. So now I can see the fine details in the overall image at the same time. So I don't have to keep zooming in to look at the detail and then zoom out to see how the image looks and then zoom back in. That becomes really inefficient really quickly. Working with this technique allows you to do both at the same time. So I can come and remove maybe these windows, and you can see on the right hand side that the image is updating. And to be frank with you, on a real project, what you probably would do is set this to 100%. So the 100% view would give you a much better representation of what is going on. And now that we're working with the clone stamp tool, I'm going to show you a couple of keyboard shortcuts that may help you. So I'm just going to select that window so you can see it there. So you can obviously paint and clone that window. I'm going to undo that. And there's a keyboard shortcut that allows you to rotate the clone source. You can hold Alt, Shift, and the less than, greater than keys. Those are the same keys as the comma and period. So Alt, Shift, Option, Shift, and then the less than key rotates the clone source. See how that window is rotating? So now when I start painting, it's not going to paint it the way it's shown here. It's just going to paint the side of it like so. So now it looks like we have the window going sideways. But anyway, I'm going to undo that. The other thing that you can do is scale. So I'm going to sample this window. There it is. If I paint it, it looks like that. I'm going to undo, and you can scale by using the bracket keys. So Alt, Shift, and the bracket keys. Right bracket key is scaling up. And now when I paint, it's a much larger window. Or, of course, I can scale down with the left bracket key. Much, much smaller. Now if I paint, it's a smaller window. So those keys are there to help you when you're cloning. If you don't want to remember keyboard shortcuts, the way to access that via a panel is by going into Window, Clone Source, and here they are. You can see the rotations that I made here, so I can rotate it even further and then start painting. And I can scale it by using this slider. So now I can start painting, and now it's a really, really tiny castle. One advantage of using the clone source is that you can sample 5 different sample sources. So I'm going to reset this, and I'm going to select the first sample source. So that's for that window. So when I start painting, you'll see that window. I can select another sample source, and that could be for that tree. And the third sample source, and maybe that could be for this top part of the castle here. So then I can go back to the first one, which was the window. So I can start painting windows. I can go to the second one, which was the tree, continue painting the tree. The third one was this top part of the castle, and I can continue painting with that. So keep these tips in mind next time that you're retouching your photos. In this tip, I'm going to show you how to work better with color range. So we're going to work with this image here, and if we wanted to change the red on her shirt to something else or simply adjust it, we will need to make a selection to only select the reds. One of the ways of doing that, of course, is by going into Select, Color Range. Color Range allows us to select the color and add colors to that selection, and we can see the preview here in this window. And we can adjust how the colors are selected by dragging this fuzziness slider. If we start selecting the red on her shirt, and then adding to that selection by selecting different kinds of red, and we start adjusting the fuzziness slider, we do an okay job, but we're selecting a lot of the background in other areas of the image. Instead, what you should do is create a selection around the area that you want to select. So I'm just going to create a rectangular marquee selection around her shirt. Then go back into the Select Color Range command, and we're focusing that area. And that is really the first tip. You can make a selection around the area that the Color Range command should focus on, and that will make it easier for you to make your selections. And I can just click on the red and add the different reds to the selection and adjust the fuzziness slider so that we only select that red. Now keep in mind that it's going to be next to impossible not to select the hands or the railing that she's leaning on because it's really close to the different shades of red that we've selected. So you can just press OK for now, and with the lasso tool, simply hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and just do very loose selections around the hands, the camera, the railing, and all the other areas that shouldn't be selected. And notice that I'm going quickly and I'm not being precise at all. Then I can simply go into the Hue and Saturation Adjustment layer. A layer mask will be created based on that selection, and now we can adjust the red on her shirt, as simple as that. In this tip, I'm going to show you how you can work with the LAB color mode to enhance your images. So we're going to work with this image here. It's an RGB image, and that is one of the most common color modes to work in Photoshop. The other one that you might have heard of is the CMYK color mode, usually for print, but there is another color mode that we can use, and that is the LAB color mode. So I'm going to select the LAB color mode, and if you click on the channels panel, you'll notice that you no longer have RGB. Now you have lightness, A, and B. So lightness is the detail of the image, the luminance values. A is a relationship between green and magenta, and B is a relationship between blue and yellow. And I actually have a graphic here to show you that. Also notice that these are the same colors as the tint slider in Lightroom and Camera Raw, and these are the same colors as the temperature slider in Lightroom and Camera Raw. But anyway, we're going to come back into the LAB channels panel. And this becomes really useful because you can do several things. And I'm going to duplicate this layer just to show you a couple of things that you can do. You can work with color without affecting detail. So if I wanted to turn that dress green in the A channel, I can simply press Ctrl-I, Command-I on the Mac to invert. That dress is now green. Obviously, it affected the entire layer, but I can go in there and make a selection around the dress. And this is obviously going to be really quick and not very precise, but you'll get the idea. And I can create a layer mask, and there it is. I missed a few spots, but as I said, this will be good enough for the example. So you can work with color without affecting the detail. The luminance of the image is still there. That is one advantage of working in the LAB color mode. Another advantage is that you can add sharpening to an image without affecting color. And let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to press Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac to duplicate. And I'm going to make sure that my new layer, layer 1, is selected. I'm going to go into the channels panel, select the lightness. I can go into filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, and I'm just going to bump up the sharpness really, really high. It's going to be an extreme so you can see the difference. So obviously I sharpen the image, and there it is. And just as a side note, Photoshop doesn't really add detail to an image. It creates the illusion of detail by adding contrast to edges in the image. So that's really what you're doing when you're sharpening images. And you can see that here, that contrast to fake sharpness. But anyway, I'm going to go back into the layers panel, and in this layer, in this background layer, I'm going to duplicate that as well. And I'm just going to apply that same filter, unsharp mask. If I go into the first option, that's the last filter that I applied. So I'm going to apply the exact same thing again. The one on top was the one that I did with the luminance channel. So it only affected the luminance of the image. And look at the difference. See that? I'm going to zoom into her arm. You can see that here. It affected the colors. Using the luminance channel, it did not. And you can see that all throughout the images. There are different areas where the sharpening affected the color. So you can see that on her nose, on her lips, and on her legs. So this is one tip that you can use to apply sharpening without affecting the color. It's subtle, but in some cases, it makes a huge difference. So I'm going to fit the image to screen. I'm going to delete both of these layers. And just to show you the power of working with LAB, how would you, in RGB, invert the luminance values but not the colors? It would be somewhat difficult, and the easiest way to do it, I think, is through the LAB color mode. So here in the LAB color mode, I can just press Ctrl-I, Command-I on the Mac to invert, and that inverts that channel. We select LAB, and look at that. We actually have the same original colors, but we inverted the luminance. So this makes it very clear that you can work with luminance separate from color, and that becomes very useful in a lot of ways when you're retouching your images. So I can bring that back by selecting that lightness, pressing Ctrl-I, Command-I to invert, and we get our original image back. One thing to note is that when you're working with adjustment layers, they're going to be a little different. Notice that we have LAB instead of RGB, and not all the adjustments are available. So we can make our adjustments to the lightness and not affect the color. I'm going to briefly go back into the RGB version of that. So I'm just going to revert to original by pressing the F12 key. You can also get to it by going into File and Revert. And what that does is that it takes our image back to the last time that we saved it, and if we haven't saved the image, to how it first looked when we opened it. So here we are. You can see the RGB label there in the tab. And if I create a curves adjustment layer and make a similar adjustment as to what I did in the LAB color mode, and I zoom in, you'll notice that I'm affecting the color. The one way that I can work with luminance without affecting color in the RGB color mode will be by using a blending mode. So I can select luminosity as a blending mode and look at the difference. Now I can work with luminance without affecting the color. So that's one trick of you getting something similar as you would with LAB. So I'm going to delete this adjustment layer. I'm going to go back into the LAB color mode. And there I am. You can see now that the tab reads LAB. I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer. And once again, I'm working with luminance without affecting color. If I change the blending mode to luminosity, it looks exactly the same. There's no difference. I'm only working with luminance detail in the L channel. And the last thing I want to mention is that if you decide to work with this color mode and you want to go back into RGB, you are going to run into a problem if you are using adjustment layers. So I'm going to go into Mode, RGB, and Photoshop is going to tell us that we cannot convert because we have an adjustment layer. We can either flatten the image, which is destructive and we don't want to do that, or we can discard the adjustment layer so we will lose it and lose the adjustment, so we don't want to do that. So instead, if you do work with adjustment layers and LAB, just put them into a smart object. So select all the layers by clicking on them and holding Shift, right click, and select Convert to Smart Object. Then you can go into Image, Mode, RGB, don't rasterize, and that gets you back into the RGB color mode. Look at the tab, and there's my smart object. I can double click on it. It takes me inside to where I have my curves adjustment layer. You can see that I'm in the LAB color mode here in the channels panel. To confirm, I can go into Image, Mode, and LAB is selected. And if you want to find out more about the LAB color mode and how it works, I would recommend checking out Dan Margolis. There's probably no one else in the world that knows more about LAB than Dan, so check him out. And that's it for this tutorial. Let me know what you thought about these 5 tips in the comments below. Don't forget to include your favorite tips for photographers and retouching in the comments as well. If this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, don't forget to click on that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.